We're joined now by National Journal's Major Garrett. Major, thanks so much for joining us today on this post-Obama speech morning. We want to start right off with that. So last night in that speech, there were a lot of things we did not hear from the president. He did not talk about an end game. He did not talk about the total cost so far and how much that could be. And really not a lot about a timetable, which are some of the questions that Americans have been expressing that they wanted to hear from him. Do you think the president made an effective case to perhaps quiet the critics for now?
I think the president bought himself some time. Not very much time, but he bought himself some time. And it's clear that there are not going to be the kind of budget implications that are going to require a congressional supplemental. At least there's no indication so far the administration is going to ask for extra spending outside of the existing Pentagon budget, and there's no sense in the House Republican leadership that one is coming. So the president is going to try to contain the costs of this, the real taxpayer implications of this mission, as best he can. And with the NATO taking over and with the U.S. military role diminishing on an active basis, it's quite possible he'll be able to thread that budgetary needle. I think what you see from Republicans is not an Obama doctrine, but a sense in this case, what is the true mission, and if the world and Libya would be better off without Muammar Gaddafi in charge, what is the coalition going to do to affect that outcome? And if it's going to do nothing to affect that outcome, is the president going to preside in a few weeks over a stalemate? I think Republicans would say, politically, if he presides over a stalemate, it'll be his stalemate and not Congress's, and all the explanations will have to come from the president.
Hey, Major, a little closer to home, you guys, National Journal, had a breakfast with Steny Hoyer this morning where Hoyer sounded like we may well be headed towards a government shutdown. Obviously, funding runs out in now less than 2 weeks. What's your sense of what's going on? I mean, we've not really been focused on this with all the Libya news.
Well, that's right. Many things have overtaken this ongoing budget squabble in Washington. First the Japanese earthquake, subsequent to tsunami, then the military action in Libya. The budget issue has sort of fallen off the radar screen, but it's going to get back up on the radar screen very soon. April 8th is when the next existing current resolution expires. If there's no deal by then and no subsequent stopgap measure to keep the government opening, we're going to be having a shutdown the first couple of weeks of April. And Steny Hoyer said today, if you'd asked him a couple of weeks ago, he would have said the chances of that happening are very slight. They're much greater of happening now. That's my sense from House and Senate Republicans and House and Senate Democrats. I wrote that this weekend for nationaljournal.com. Positions are hardening. And interestingly, after Steny Hoyer left the stage, I moderated a panel with many people, among them former DNC Chairman Howard Dean. And he said, if I were at the DNC, I'd be rooting for a shutdown now. I would want a shutdown because Democrats need this fight. They should want this fight to portray Republicans as extremists. That's just one voice in the Democratic coalition. But I thought it was very interesting that Howard Dean would say, if you're a Democrat, if you work at the DNC, if you work in the Senate or House leadership, you should want a shutdown.
Major, what's your sense of what the White House is thinking about that right now? And what are we going to see from President Obama over the next 10 days before that deadline for this one to expire?
Well, think about it this way, Karen and John knows this very well. The deadline really isn't 10 days, because if there's going to be a grand deal that's going to resolve this whole budget issue once and for all, it needs to be done by Thursday of this week, because Republicans are not going to bring any bill to the House floor that resolves all these budget issues on an expedited basis. That means it has to sit for at least 3 full calendar days for everyone to take a look at it, be consistent with their rules for big legislation coming to the floor. So you need to have it done by Thursday. If it's not done by Thursday, then there's going to have to be some last-minute compromise to extend the government.
So that's our deadline. Major, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us on Top Line. And Karen, I mean, if you really don't have a birth certificate, how do we know that you're an American citizen?
I'll produce some sort of document. I can't give you the birth certificate, but as I said, I'm running for president.
You claim you were born.